So, I hope you can hear me and the whole thing is working. Let's see. This should be working, hopefully. Okay, hello, welcome. I hope the audio is working. I just checked it quickly. It should be working. Let me know if there's any problem. Just write in the comments. And welcome to another live session. I just love to do these. A live session on agility, especially on Agile Elements is what I called it. The idea behind that is that many people kind of misunderstand agility. And there's also the wish to just use a few Agile elements, like not a whole Agile framework and all the stuff, but just a few. Can we just cherry pick a few things that we think might help us and get started from there? And today, this is basically a replay or a repeat if you've listened to an audio live event I did last week. I talked about the same topic. Maybe we talk about different details today. So what are Agile elements that you can actually use? And what are the prerequisites? Like, can you do that without, or what's the prerequisite? What needs to be there in place for you to successfully use Agile elements, Agile methods, like Agile techniques that we have? And then we go into the single techniques that we have. But let me start with the basics, because those of you who know me know that agility, you cannot become agile just by adopting any agile framework or just by using agile techniques. That's not how it works. So, for agility and for the agile techniques to work, we actually need something in place. We need a foundation. Because if you just do agile frameworks, you will not be agile. I've seen, like, I've been doing this for more than 20 years, and I've seen many companies who implemented agile frameworks, but weren't a tiny bit agile at all. So agile frameworks do not make you agile. And all the agile techniques do not by themselves make you agile. Having said that, you can still use certain agile techniques if you want to. Just be sure to have the foundation in place. And I want to spend the first few minutes to talk about the foundation. So, what makes agility work? What makes or breaks agility? Some say it's the agile frameworks. It's not. Let me tell you, from my experience with global companies, it's not. And then the next answer is, well, for agility, you need an agile mindset. And while that is true, somewhat, this agile mindset is kind of an elusive thing. It's kind of, I don't like the word mindset, because it's often used more as an excuse than anything. It's like, okay, that mindset needs to be there. Before that, we cannot be agile. It's your duty to have that agile mindset, and then we can use all the agile techniques. But that's not very helpful, very actionable. How do we get to that agile mindset? How do we establish a culture that is open, focused, that embraces feedback, a culture where people are respectful with each other, where people are courageous, taking risks? It's not as easy as just mentioning the values. Although we would like to have it like that, it's not that easy. Try to make someone more courageous by screaming at them, "Be more courageous!" Yeah. I probably don't tell you a secret if I tell you that this doesn't work. So, agile mindset. What needs to be in place for that to happen? At the core, to make it short, it's a certain view of the human being that you have. That's at the very foundation. And that is something that I have found out over the many years that I've been doing this. It's the view of the human being. It's how you view other how you view other people. What you assume about their intentions, what you assume about their intentions when you see their behavior. When you see them making mistakes, when you see them opposing an agile transformation, when you see them being late to a meeting. What do you assume about these people? This is what it comes down to. And for agile techniques to work, we need to always assume positive intent. API. We need to assume positive intent. So when someone makes a mistake, we do not assume that that person was malicious or that person was just disorganized, lazy, not capable. All these things we don't assume. Okay? That's a big shift for some companies. But we assume that that person that made a mistake tried to push the limits, tried to do more than what they signed up for. They tried to be innovative, to do new things. And they might fail at that. And how we cope with that, how we react to that, that's important for agile methods, if they can work or not. So if we meet someone who made a mistake and screwed up with like the blame game, if you ever do that mistake again, you're going to be fired or something. Obviously, that's not very agile. And in such a circumstance, you cannot have agile techniques like product owners that make decisions on their own. Because they will not. In an environment where a wrong decision can cost you your career, you will not make decisions. I've seen companies that shied away from decisions. Like the product owners, they outright refused to make a decision unless they had consulted with their superior and with all the others involved before. You can imagine how that ends. Okay? These people plan for months and years before they finally do something. Because they could be wrong in their decision and they just want to basically cover their asses. Okay? They don't want to be responsible when shit hits the fan. And that's, I can understand that. But it's the environment, it's how other people view their mistakes that makes the difference. If you assume they have good intentions and they just screwed up, and you applaud them for that, then you will have product owners who really embrace their role. It's the same for self-managing teams. You cannot have a self-managing team if you fundamentally mistrust people. If you think that that people would be lazy once you look away, that you need to control them, that you need to have metrics to measure their performance, and that if they make mistakes, it's because they are lazy or incapable, or just if they are late, they are disorganized. If these assumptions are in place, you will never succeed with self-managing teams, with product owners, with all the agile techniques that we have. So, to close that introduction, the foundation for all these agile elements that I'm gonna talk about today is assuming positive intent. It's that view of the human being, that assumption that everybody fundamentally wants to do great stuff, wants to push the limits, wants to do great work. And if they make a mistake, it's not because they are stupid or lazy. It's quite the opposite. they probably make a mistake because they try to push the limits. If they do not make mistakes, I would be worried. Okay? Because then they are playing it safe. They are very risk averse and only kind of do things that are certain. Jeff Bezos often says that if you know the outcome of an experiment, you know the experiment will succeed, then it's not an experiment. Failure is an inherent part of experimenting and of innovating and of growing and becoming better. You need to fail. Often, failures are a sign that you're going in the right direction. And that shift of mind and that how you view other people, that's the important foundation for many Agile frameworks, for basically all the Agile frameworks and for many of the Agile techniques. If we don't have that, then all of that wouldn't work. Okay? That is important. If you want to dive deeper on this, I write on the, let me show you that. I write on my Agile Compass about that. It's a free newsletter. You can just sign up for that. And I write about how to make this, how to create such an environment, how to kind of create a culture in which assuming positive intent is actually a thing. It also has to do with behavioral science, with understanding motivation in people. What motivates people? Small hint, it's not money. Money needs to be there, money needs to be fair, that is important, but it's not what motivates people to do great things. Otherwise, all the billionaires wouldn't work anymore, but they do. So what motivates people is, if we bring it down to the Daniel Pink formula, it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. There's no money in there. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is about deciding about myself, having control, having, autonomy. Being able to decide for myself. Being able to decide when I work, how I do the work, with whom I work, ideally, and on what I work. Not all these factors of autonomy are always possible, but the more you give people, the more agility you will get. And then we have mastery. People want to be great in their job. Look at the best musicians in the world, for example. They practice every day. I mean, they are the best in the world and they practice every day. This is because they don't do it to be the best or to make money. They do it because they want to achieve mastery. And they know that they will never achieve mastery. So it's an endless thing. But this is what motivates us. And that's what motivates all of us. We want to do a great job. And purpose. Purpose is not a nice add-on. We want to have some purpose in the work we do. We want to see our personal values reflected in the work we do. And that's not a nice to have if we have time for that, but this is an integral part of intrinsic motivation. So understanding all that, and I write about a lot of that in the on the Agile Compass, so if you're interested. But understanding all that is the foundation for the Agile Elements. And now I'd say, let's get into the Agile Elements. So, there are many Agile techniques that you can use, even if you don't use a full-sized framework like SAFe or Scrum, or you try to do Spotify, which some companies still do, which is not a framework. It's just a company that you can take inspiration from, like maybe Google, maybe like SpaceX, maybe, I don't know, whatever floats your boat. And I think there were great coaches at Spotify, and they have a lot of great ideas to take inspiration from, but just don't mistake it for a framework that you can just copy paste onto your organization. And we all know, even Spotify never fully implemented the Spotify framework, that what people call it, or the Spotify model, and they certainly don't do it today. Now they've grown to a different size. So let's pick a few elements. Let's maybe start with a simple one. In many Agile frameworks, we have reviews or demos. We have the sprint review, we have the system demo, events like that in many frameworks. And even if you don't do a framework, that thing in itself can already be beneficial. We just have to understand what it's all about. Because often it's misunderstood. Often the sprint review or the system demo is just seen as a planning interval. Okay, it's just seen as chunking up your plan into little pieces and then kind of assessing that plan, the progress, like the traditional project management progress. How many tasks did we achieve? Did we achieve what we planned? And this is not the purpose of a review or of a demo. There's a different purpose behind that. The purpose behind all that is, and please, if you have questions, by the way, just put them in the chat or in the comment, and I hope I get them in time. Sometimes it's a little delayed. The stream is delayed, half a minute or so, so please be forgiving if I don't reply right away. So the review, the whole purpose of the review is not to assess your progress in your plan. That's a misunderstanding and frankly an abuse of that Agile tool. The purpose of the review is to shorten your feedback loop. Okay, this is kind of like the scientific method. We have an hypothesis. We think we know how the world works. We have a model and a hypothesis. Then we create an experiment to validate, is our model correct? Does it work? And then we do an experiment in the real world. We get feedback from the real world. In business, that means actual customers. Okay? That's what it's meant for. So you get feedback, you have a hypothesis, a guess. You think, okay, this feature is probably something that customers want. Because you did market research, because you talked to focus groups maybe or something, or because just you think you know your target audience. This is an assumption. This is not a fact. This is an assumption. Even if customers told you that, there is a difference between a customer telling you, yes, I would like that fancy car, and then actually asking them for the money to buy that car. And then they have all kinds of excuses. Oh no, not right now, and maybe it's too expensive still, and whatever. So it's a guess what you have. So every feature idea that a product manager has or a product owner has is just an assumption. It's just a guess built on assumptions. And what you want to do as early as possible is you want to validate or invalidate that assumption. Because the best product managers in the world, the best of the best, are wrong 50% of the time. Half of their feature ideas are not adding value for the business or for the customer. We just don't know which 50%. That would make life a lot easier. So we need to assume that most of what we come up with, product ideas, feature ideas, things, how we do that, processes and all that, is not valuable, is wrong, or just could be done better. And we don't want to pile up a lot of features over months and years and then ask for a verdict on the final pile of features. Like, then if the customers vote with their feet or with their wallet, okay? So they will tell you immediately, We don't want that. And then good luck figuring out which feature was the wrong one. So we want to validate immediately. And this is why we have short iteration cycles. An agile technique is to shorten this feedback cycle from when you have an idea until you get the feedback from the real world. Do the experiment. And this is what reviews are actually for. They are just an event. Some teams do that every week, or you can do it more often. There are companies who basically do that multiple times a day in different formats. But the thing is, you want to shorten that feedback loop as much as possible to get early feedback. Because when you develop a feature idea and after a week you get the feedback, yeah, no, that's not adding value. Or you get the feedback, yes, that's a good idea, but please keep that in mind. If you don't keep that in mind, then the feature is worthless. It's useless. That's great because you only, in the worst case, you only wasted a week of development time until you figured that out. And then it's also easy to kind of rework that and see what was wrong. You get very specific feedback on the features you did and not just on a bunch of features that you did over a year or two. So this is what the review is for. The important point when you do a review, however you call it, and whether you do it with a framework or without, do frequent reviews in short cycles, like shorten the feedback loop as much as possible. Like there's usually, depending on your context and business, there are sensible limits to how short you can make that. Usually these limits can be shifted with some engineering, usually, like automated tests and all that, which is very important. Tesla moved the needle for these, how often you can change something and kind of get feedback whether it still works in a whole package. They moved that from, the car industry usually has 3 years or 7 years cycles, and they moved that down to 1 day. So it is possible. It's not easy. Nobody said it would be easy. But a big trick here is test automation. And we can talk about that element later. But let's stick with the review for now. You want to have reviews. You want to test your stuff in the real world as early as possible. That doesn't necessarily have to mean that you release it to the public. You could do canary deployments where you just release to like 1% or 5% of your customer base and try it out. And then you can roll it back if it doesn't work. You can just take the learning and improve. Or maybe you have to test with a beta tester group, which, yes, it's better than nothing. And then the important part of the review is not showing them the stuff you did and being proud of how much you did and that you stuck to your plan or something. We don't care about that. Planning is good, but the plan, yeah, that's just throw it away. Okay. Planning is good, but the plan is not a holy thing, sacred thing that we have to stick to. What we want is create value. And when we do these reviews, we want to elicit feedback from the customer. We want to elicit feedback. That's the whole point. So give the product to them. Let them use it. Watch them while they use it, the new features. Ask them questions. Let them talk and listen to their feedback. And also what's so nice when we have these reviews is this is often the time when we see whether the integration works between different features. Like when multiple features come together and then suddenly you see that something fell through the cracks between the features. Yeah, that's also what the review is for. It's also kind of feedback. You see what's missing before it's too late, before it piles up and then you get into these huge integration phases, stabilization phases that always stretch longer than the whole project before. So do that early on. And then take that feedback that your customers give you and change your plan. This is the whole point. If you never change your plan or your backlog, if you use that, then why do the review session at all? The purpose is to change your plan, to learn how you can change your plan to deliver even more value. You might add things, you might throw things out, you might reprioritize things. So adjust your plan in every review. Maybe not in every review, but it should be a frequent thing that you adjust your plan. If you don't do that, then it's not an actual review. Then it's just, I don't know, it's just to satisfy some project management or whatever. So that's about the review. And if you want to extend that, you want to obviously measure like more outcome-based metrics, like what is actually creating value for customers. And I can point you to the Lean Startup Build, Measure, Learn cycle, and also use experiments. Like I use the business model canvas a lot, where you can quickly sketch a business model, find the riskiest assumptions. It's all assumptions, by the way. If you plan it, and no matter how much research you did, it's all assumptions. And then design experiments for the different assumptions, for the highest risk assumptions that could break your business model, and then see whether you're right. Because we are wrong most of the time. And that is okay, by the way. Going back to the foundation, the assuming positive intent, how you view other human beings. You go, if you're wrong with the features you proposed or you developed, it's okay. It's not your fault. It doesn't mean that you're a bad product manager or you're a bad team. No, it's just, it's natural. It belongs to the process. We make mistakes. If we don't make mistakes, then you should be worried. If you never get feedback that you should change something, then you should be worried. But if you find out, oh, that feature, that was a stupid idea, great. You learned early on without spending too much money and energy how you can increase the value of the product. And that's the whole purpose. So see that as a good sign. Embrace the feedback. Don't fear it. And again, for product managers to not fear feedback, we have to have a certain culture in a company. We have to have leadership who understands that, who assumes positive intent if the product manager fails. They need to assume positive intent and say, yes, it's great that you figure it out that early. And not, oh, you planned wrong or something. This is why this what we often call the mindset is so important. If that's not there, then the reviews will quickly turn into just status updates and progress on the plan or something. Okay, we talked about test automation. I want to dive into that topic a little more, which is also something you can use even if you don't use an Agile framework. So, test automation is something that affects everybody. It might have started, at least in the context of agility, with software development, but it's equally, if not even more important in hardware development and also in services. It's harder in services, but you should invest in test automation. And let me explain what that is, because many people have a wrong understanding, a different connotation. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just a different connotation when we talk about test and testing. Testing is what most people think comes last. It's you build something and at the end you kind of want to have quality assurance. You want to make sure that the thing is actually working. And so in hardware, you would just pick one thing. You would just like pick every 1,000th car or something and just test it. See if that's okay. And then you assume that all the other cars are also okay. Or if you find a flaw, then you kind of have to revisit or ditch all the other 1,000 cars that came before it. In software testing also, we test the software. That's the common assumption, that we test at the end. And that is not what we talk about when we talk about testing in the context of agility. That's just a tiny aspect, but not the main thing. So testing is about, first of all, most of the testing that happens in the companies I coach, it's often that they have separate test teams or testers usually on separate teams. There are people on the test team, and I always get confused because my notion of a test team is different, but bear with me for a second. We will get into that. For them, test teams, maybe you've seen that in your company. Test teams are a bunch of people who test the product. So all they do is they sit there all day long, they click through the software. They have certain like documents and paths where they click through, and they try to figure out whether everything's working. It's that test last assumption. And because it's human labor and there are coming so many features, or in hardware, so many products and new features, it's hard to test everything. You would just kind of test certain test cases. And you wouldn't necessarily do regression testing all the time. You wouldn't retest whether you broke something with a new feature that worked before. Often the testing focuses only on the new stuff. So that's brittle, and it's expensive, and it's slow. With manual testing, I mean, how often would you test? If I would tell you that Agile teams, the tests, they're basically continuously testing every second, that wouldn't work with manual testing. So what many companies do is they have a test phase at the end. They don't even test every sprint or iteration. They have a test phase before release. And that's not the best way to do it, because that's pretty late. If you find a mistake, you know, the longer it takes to find a mistake, the more expensive it gets. So you want to find a mistake early on. You want to shorten that feedback loop again. And with manual testing, there's a limit to that. So one big aspect is automated testing. You need to automate testing. And that can be scary, because sometimes it can be expensive. Sometimes for legacy products, it can be difficult to approach. I've done that with legacy products. It's not fun at all. It's easier, by the way, if you start with a new product and you start with automated testing right away. That makes life so much easier. But most of us deal with existing projects and products, so we have to add on testing later. And it's a big investment. I would advise you to start small. If you have a manual test team, then the first thing you could do is provide them with like seed data, that they don't have to kind of enter all the data all the time for every test case. Then provide them with a few scripts that they can run, maybe the login, or just to create 2 or 3 items in the software, that this thing can work, and they can just click a button and a second later the data is there. So that's partly automated. That's already a step in the right direction. But the real benefit comes when we fully automate the tests. And in that moment, the test team becomes a whole different thing, and becomes the test team that I would understand when I see test team somewhere. The test team are not the people who are doing the testing. The testing remains with the people who develop the feature. Those people who develop the feature or develop the hardware, they are responsible for making damn sure that it works. So they are responsible for testing. The test team is only there to help them do the testing. So the test team might provide infrastructure, like a test runner or a CI/CD server, where the tests run on, automated. And they can also coach the developers, helping them to write good test cases, how to write good test cases with edge cases and all the stuff, what to look for. So they are more consultants, coaches, and they provide the service. They don't test themselves. The test teams don't test themselves in an agile environment. And now we're getting closer to test automation in agility. You want the developers test themselves. And then we go one step further. I don't want the developers to develop a feature and then test it. I want them to test the feature and then develop it. That is called test-first development or test-driven development, TDD or BDD, which behavior-driven development is just to kind of get people off of that different connotation when they talk about tests, like behavior-driven development. But it's essentially test-driven development. You write the test first, then you write the feature. Might sound strange, but what if I tell you that it even works in hardware? You develop the test before you develop the actual hardware product. This is something that, for example, Tesla does. That company is arguably insanely agile. You can like them or not. You can definitely like or like not their CEO. But the company itself is pretty agile and pretty damn successful. And they do test-driven development. Before they developed the seats for their car, for their Model 3, they developed a robot that tested seats. Before they even knew what the seats would look like. Okay? They developed the test first, like a robot that could like stamp on the seat and something and see if it fulfills all the safety requirements, all the compliance, all the regulatory requirements, and also the wishes of the customers. Like how often can you wipe off a coffee stain before it really becomes a stain? These things are tested. And they develop that testing device before they develop the actual seat. Software developers do that all the time. They develop a test first and then they develop the feature. The nice thing about that is there are so many great things about that. I can list everything. But first of all, you start from viewing the whole thing through the eyes of a customer. When designing the test, you really have to understand the business requirements. You don't have to think about the implementation and the solution, but you have to understand the problem first to create a test. So that helps you actually clarify requirements, unearth hidden assumptions early on. It's also a documentation of the requirements, of how the system should behave. And because it's an automated test, it's guaranteed to be up to date. This documentation is always up to date, which we cannot say of all the documentation we have. So that's a big benefit. It's also a wonderful tool. An automated test is also a wonderful tool for a new developer coming onto the team, wanting to understand how the system works. This is basically a documentation of the system. And you can, in code, you can actually copy paste the tests as kind of code examples to start working and start learning. It's so much easier. And also, if you develop the test first and it fails, you know that your test works. So sometimes it can be the case that you write a test and even you didn't implement anything yet, but it's already green. It's already showing, hey, I pass. And this is obviously a bad sign. This means that you should redesign your test. So many benefits to having the test first. And then once you have the test, you think about the architecture, the interfaces, you think about the view of the customer more than about the internals and the solution. Then you have that, and then you can start developing the implementation. You can come up with a seed that you put into that robot. And it's pretty liberating. You can try things, you can make mistakes, you can just try crazy things because you don't need to consider everything. You don't need to have the whole code base in your head to see whether you break something or whether this could work or that could work. You just stick it in the test thing and it will tell you whether it works or not. Okay, you will see if you fulfilled the requirements. So you just develop and implement and try things and experiment until the test turns green. And then there's a 3-step process for developers. It's called red, green, refactor. Red is you write the test, the failing test, it's always red. Then you implement until the test turns green. And once it turns green, you stop implementing. That will prevent you from gold plating, from implementing more than what we actually need. And that's good for the business. And that's good for not over-engineering things and preparing for a future that might never come. So after the test is green, we go into the refactoring stage, the third on the list. Red, green, refactor. Refactor means now you stop, you implemented it, it's working, and now you clean up. You rearrange the code, you rearrange maybe the hardware, the wires, maybe it was just like with a I don't know, a piece of cardboard and you tried it out and now you can make it real solid and you can redo the wiring so there's more efficient. In code, you can just refactor, you can kind of move methods. You can rename methods that had like a wrong name. You thought they would do something, but now they do something else. So you rename them, that it's easier to understand. And these tiny changes are actually architecture designs. You're actually architecturing your product or your software. And that is where emerging architecture comes from, a whole different topic. Emerging architecture that is always the best fit for the feature set you currently have. It's not that big upfront architecture that we know from before, where someone sits in their ivory tower and thinks up an architecture that you have to stick to for the next 10 years. No, it's happening in that refactoring step, bit by bit. And that refactoring can be fearless, by the way. Because you have tests, and you not only have the test you've written for that feature, but you also have all the other tests for all the other features that came before. So you have regression tests. You can see whether you broke something that worked before. You will never, in that scenario, you will never hear someone say again, never touch a running system. Like this sentence, never touch a running system, is a sign that you are doing something not right, okay? You should not be afraid to touch the system. Yes, it works, but now we can clean it up. And we can be sure that the tests remain green because we have that test suite. We can just rip out parts of the code that we think, this could work over here and I could do that and this could just be deleted. Let's see what happens. You see what happens. If it works, great. You just optimize the product. If it doesn't work, you immediately know what you need to adjust to make it work. Going back to Tesla, they do that in hardware. Every car self-tests constantly while it's being built. Okay, the computer is used for self-tests during production. So engineers can just say, in this model, let's just move the sensors from here to there because I think that's shortening the wiring. It's going to save us some money, but it's also have a better view on the whole thing. Okay, they don't need to discuss and and consult the designers of the car before what impact this could have and what they need to consider. No, they just move the damn thing and the car self-tests and a minute later tells them, bad idea because now some function doesn't work anymore. Or the car tells them, great, everything works. So now they optimize the product. And these tiny optimizations, they happen every day. This is how a company can be so insanely fast, going from 0 to I don't know how many cars they make nowadays. And this whole thing, like building up the testing, I often get the argument that costs time, that is, we don't have that time right now, and it costs money, and we need that extra test infrastructure to run all that. Is that even worth it? And my answer is, I've never seen that this was wasted. It's always worth it, unless you build a product that is really only supposed to last for 2 weeks or something, and then you just throw everything away. I mean, the whole product line. But that's likely not the case for most of the products. So always invest in automated testing. And it's not easy, as I said. If we look at Tesla, a company who does that, they invest a lot of money. They burn a lot of money, as people say. And you need to realize that about half of the total spendings they have, the total money they burn, half of that is going into automation. And most of that is going into test automation. So yes, it's not easy, but it's worth it. You can use a test-driven approach, a test-first approach, test automation, even without an Agile framework. Okay, that's an element you can use. And to start with, just begin by helping, if you have manual testers, helping them, give them scripts, give them seed data so that it's at least partially automated and they can test more often. And then you can shorten that feedback cycle. You can be more fearless in the design changes you make. So that was the element of automated testing. We talked about the reviews. Maybe let's talk about something different, which is more related to the basics that make agility work. Techniques to create these basics. This is what I mentioned early on, the assuming positive intent, the creating the culture, the mindset for people to actually be courageous, make decisions, be focused, be innovative, develop a healthy failure culture. There have to be certain things in place for that to work. And one important thing is psychological safety. Psychological safety. Again, if you're interested in all these and in more depth interested in that, I write about that on my free newsletter, the Agile Compass. So you can get that. And last week I wrote about psychological safety, about why it's so important, and more interestingly, about certain techniques, how you can achieve psychological safety. So if you're interested in that, I would be happy to welcome you there. It has more detailed information about what I'm telling you here right now. And again, it's free. Just sign up. So psychological safety is very important because I already mentioned product owners shying away from making decisions because they don't feel safe making that decision. They think if they make a mistake, it will have an impact on their career. It's usually not that they directly lose their job or something, but you better make fewer mistakes, especially in large corporations, in the culture. And that's not a good foundation on which to build agile techniques and agility. So we need to create psychological safety. We need to comfort people that it's okay to speak up. If they see a problem, that they just say, hey, I see a problem, we need to solve this. Or if they mess up, they make a mistake, that they say, hey, it was me, sorry. And that they don't try to hide it because of the culture that kind of punishes that. That they say, oh, I hope nobody notices, or I'm trying to fix it myself. Maybe I can kind of work around that. Or, hey, I see a problem, but hey, I don't speak up because it might have negative consequences. Or nobody might listen to me. So we need that psychological safety, that it's safe for people to be their true selves. To say, oh, I don't think this idea will work. Or to say, hey, I have a crazy idea, but hey, I don't know if it works. Or I messed up, I made a mistake. And to create this psychological safety and the trust that we need, the vulnerability and the trust that it takes for psychological safety, there are a few techniques you can use. There are many techniques to get to more psychological safety. And I just mentioned a few. So before I mention the first technique, one thing that I don't know if you can call it a technique, but it's leadership modeling the behavior. It's leaders going first. If you want to create psychological safety and such an environment in which people speak up and are okay in admitting mistakes, okay in trying things, then you have to go first. You have to be vulnerable. You have to admit mistakes. And that is difficult for some leaders because the old school of management, leadership, sometimes tells people, as a leader, you have to appear confident always. Even if you have doubts, don't show it. If you make a decision and you're unsure about it, just stand behind it and own it as if you were 100% sure. Never show fear, doubt, that you're uncertain, and things like that. And this is not what works for leaders today. If you read any leadership book, if you listen to any experts in leadership, they will tell you that. It's be authentic, be a human being. It's be vulnerable. Show them that you are just a human being, that you can make mistakes. And also, that also goes to the teams and to the people looking up to their superiors. Your superiors are human beings, just like all of us. They are not superhuman. Their position doesn't turn them into superhuman beings who never fear, never doubt, always know the answer. They might appear like that, but they are human beings. Be empathetic with them. That is important. So, leaders modeling the behavior. Leaders admit mistakes. And once leaders start to admit mistakes, you can sometimes a little humor helps, not always, sometimes, but admit mistakes and show that it is okay to make mistakes and to mess up. That we don't assume that you are stupid or lazy, and that's why you made a mistake, but we assume that you tried hard, and this is why you make mistakes. So not making mistakes would be a bad sign. Model that behavior. And techniques to establish psychological safety in teams can be, I'm going to list the personal history exercise, the lifeline exercise, moving motivators, and I'm going to talk about power distance. So the personal history exercise comes from Lencioni, from the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And lack of trust is actually a pretty huge dysfunction of a team if you don't have trust. So The personal history exercise can help to make that first step into the realm of trust. Because if you have a team that is not comfortable, doesn't have psychological safety, or they don't necessarily trust each other, it doesn't have to be mistrust or something, but it's just new people also just jump around each other, and you have to earn trust. It takes time, okay? And the personal history exercise helps you make that first step. It's simple. It's very simple. You just get together, like two people get together, and they answer 2 or 3 simple questions. The first question is usually, you can have different questions. The first question might be something like, where did you grow up? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? How many siblings did you have? Like things like that, where it's about facts. It's not really, you don't have to open up a lot to tell people about that. Yet it already can lead to interesting discussions. Like when people were born in a different country, they migrated at an early age, or they maybe were adopted or had a lot of siblings or whatever. That can already be interesting and can help to kind of empathize with our team members a little more, okay, with our colleagues. We understand them a little better. We know how to take their, I don't know, maybe opposition in certain points or something. But it's on the surface. You can go as deep as you want. And then you add another question like, what was an important event in your childhood? What kind of formed you? What is a big event? And people are free to pick something that goes very deep emotionally and opens up a lot, or something that is rather maybe superficial. So you leave it to the people how much vulnerability they already want to show. And this is just the first tiny step. It can even work with teams who have been working together for years. Sometimes these teams don't even know each other personally. And then this is the first time they hear that their colleague that they've been working with for 2 years migrated from a different continent at the age of 8 and had a tough time like arriving in the new country. That starts to build trust, vulnerability, and that environment for psychological safety. We can understand others more. And of course, in that exercise, again, leaders go first. If you do that as a leader, you go first. You tell your story first. And there's a nice version of that personal history exercise that a great colleague of mine, Kimberly Weefling from Silicon Valley, always or does. I don't know if she does it always, but I've seen her doing it. I've experienced that. And I kind of adopted that. Is when you meet a new person, be it on a team or be it just because you meet someone, then just she will take you for a quick walk, and the first thing she'll ask you is, so tell me your life story in 2 minutes. Start from your birth. Go. So I think this is pretty amazing, and it just fits her. Those of you who know her, she's amazing. And the time box, the 2-minute time box, is just it doesn't give you a lot of time to think in which light you want to present yourself. So you don't get into, what do I want to tell? Do I want to talk about this side of mine or this? No, you don't have time. You just start talking. You start at your birth, which is also something most people don't have to think about. And you can just start talking. And while you talk, you will kind of move into territory that is more comfortable for you to share, and you can decide how deep you go. But it will quickly turn into an interesting discussion where you build a lot of trust. So that's a great variation. You can then follow that up with a lifeline exercise if you want to. Lifeline is where you kind of draw the the mood curve of your life from birth, with the ups and downs. And then you can explain the ups and downs, or people can ask about them, and you can explain them to the group later on. What's that low point? What's that high point? And what's also so nice about the lifeline exercise is that it's so nice to see that everyone else is just a human being with ups and downs. It's especially powerful if your CEO comes to the workshop or to the team and shows their lifeline. Because it shows that we're all human beings. We all have our ups and downs. And it's also refreshing sometimes to see that the CEO's ups and downs, they might not be connected to the company. They might be family or health or personal things. So that can build a lot of trust also with the leadership, with the management levels of the company. So nice exercise, personal history exercise. Google that, or as I said, just subscribe here because there is the article that you can find there from last week that talks about that and also has a link to the or has more depth on the personal history exercise. I don't even know if I have a link in there because it's in the book. Another thing is the moving motivators. I like that a lot. And now the time is up, but let me just continue for a few minutes. The moving motivators by Jochen Apalo. I've used them to great effect. It's just a set of cards, 10 cards. What motivates us? Like power, like order, relatedness, curiosity, whatever. And everyone on the team puts these 10 cards in order, in a priority. What's most important to you? What's your most important motivator? And just doing that and seeing the motivation priorities of your colleagues goes a long way in understanding. I've had an experience with a team that was particularly tough. Like, that team was called dysfunctional. They used up many coaches before me and my colleague. And we were kind of met with adversity, a lot of adversity. And I thought they would kick us out. So, management basically told us, you have to fix that team somehow. And what we could do with them, we did the moving motivators. And one thing that happened in the team was that all the motivation hierarchies were similar, except for one. There was one developer, and her hierarchy or her priorities were kind of opposed to that of the rest of the team. Most developers in the team, or all of them, had high priority, like, we want to have power over our decisions. We want to decide what we work on, how we solve something. We are curious. We want to try new things, and we value our freedom that we can decide that. And that one developer, her highest point was order. That we have a structured way of doing things. We know how we do things. And that kind of obviously clashed with the freedom, curiosity way that the others handled things. And the second they saw that, they immediately, in retrospect, understood all the difficult conversations they had and the arguments. And they talked to her and said, oh, now we understand why you oppose that, why you, okay. That makes it clear. And from that point on, like, the team worked much better. Okay. There were other things we did with the team to kind of help them because it was a tough case. But that was an important point, and the moving motivators helped a lot. And it doesn't always work. It's not a guarantee. But it's just one more tool in your toolbox that you can use when you encounter such situations. Okay, and then in the context of psychological safety and of the culture and mindset. There is one thing that, I don't know if you could call it a tool, that I also use, which is power distance. There is an index that ranks countries or cultures around the world on power distance. Now it's debatable, okay? Don't take this for 100% certainty, because in every country there are people, we are individuals. You cannot say that every German is the same, every American is the same, every Chinese is the same. People are vastly different from each other. Still, it helps to know what a certain kind of cultural undercurrent is in certain countries. And I've seen that and I've used that for positive effect. So power distance means how much you just follow your leader or your boss in that case. It's not even leader, it's boss. That's also, that extends to the private life, like how is the hierarchy lived and such a thing, like maybe with elders or with men and women or something. So typically we think of European, Scandinavian countries. They are all different. They have different cultures, vastly different. But we think of them as low power distance. They are comfortable with calling out the idea their boss just put on the table to be bad. Like they will oppose their boss. No problem. If the idea counts more than the rank. And then there are countries where it's the opposite, where you would never openly oppose your boss. And I've experienced a flavor of that also in some Eastern European countries. Again, it's only individuals. It's different from country to country. You cannot say Eastern Europe is the same. It's different, and neighboring countries are vastly different. Or in Japan, for example, there is also this. You do not say no to your boss. You kind of try to avoid saying yes if you want to say no, which is a little awkward to people who are used to a different culture. So knowing the power distance, the general power distance in a country, can help you understand behavior. And we go back to the assuming positive intent, that how you view other human beings, that it's all based on. I once had a developer in the team who kind of it took him days to admit that he had a problem and to ask for help. Okay? It was, and we always said, why didn't you ask earlier? Now you wasted 3 days with that problem. We could have helped you right away. And the first assumption, which was wrong, was that that developer and maybe from that country, they are just too proud to admit mistakes. They don't want to lose their face. But that wasn't the case. Okay, that was a wrong assumption. It turned out that we should have assumed positive intent. Always. Because that developer tried to do the best for the team. They wanted the team to succeed, and they wanted to do the best for the team. They didn't do that to protect their own face or themselves. They wanted to do the best for the team. And while we were looking at him and saying, you wasted 3 days trying to figure out the problem yourself. If you would have asked earlier, we could have figured it out in an hour. Why did you waste our time? So we thought he was against the team. But what he said is, well, I do this because I do this for the team. I don't want to bother the team with my kind of problems or incompetence if that's the cause. So I try to solve the problem on my own, and only if I find out that I cannot get through to it and I need help, then I will call for help. So that I don't bother the team and they can continue working on the other stuff. So his intention was exactly the same as our intention. He just had a different perspective and a different way of going there. And once we understood that we are on the same side, that we're not opposed to each other, we all want to do the same thing. We want the team to succeed. Then we could openly just talk about it and come to a mode that works. Like we said, no, you are actually wasting our time if you wait too long. And then he could just open up and say, hey, I need help now. And that worked much better. But the starting point was understanding that cultural difference that was behind that. And also, with all that, always assuming positive intent. Don't assume that person is doing that to be mean or to kind of do less work or to protect their own face or something. No, they do it because they want to build a great product and they want the team to succeed. If you always have that assumption of positive intent, API, assume positive intent, then all of these agile techniques can work. And even if you don't use any particular agile techniques, assuming positive intent will lead to a much more agile and innovative and productive culture. So I talked a lot about the topics. There's so much more I could talk about, like techniques from WIP, work in progress limits, to kind of the inner team as a method, to predictions and estimation. Oh, that's an interesting topic, estimation and how that works and how it doesn't work. Things like, also user stories and backlogs and story mapping and how that works, because that's also often misunderstood. Many of these techniques, and maybe in the next live session, I can go into a few more of these. And what I want you to take away from this is, first of all, I would love to see you on the Agile Compass to get these articles, because then it's much more in depth than what we can do here in an hour of talking. But what I want you to get away with is that idea of assuming positive intent and that view of the human being as the foundation of any agile method. Implementing an agile framework will not make you agile. Picking any of these agile methods we talked about will not make you agile. You have to have that view of a human being established first. That mindset, what coaches often call it. And only then can all these ideas and methods and agile techniques work. And with that, I'll leave you for the rest of the day. So always assume positive intent. And I would love to see you back here for the next live session. I just love that. And now I see the comments coming in. Thank you for the feedback. Really appreciate that. And next time, we can continue here and do some more. Have a great day. Goodbye.